We've spoken about the education and specifically secular education that yeshiva students are receiving, or in most cases not receiving in New York City, particularly here in Brooklyn. The chair of the New York City Council's Education Committee, City Councilmember Daniel Dromm, issued this statement when he knew that we were doing an update. And it reads, "At the March 21st Education Committee hearing, I continued to press Chancellor Farina for an update on the Department of Education's investigation into yeshivas that did not provide secular education to students. I'm deeply concerned that the investigation, which began in 2015, is still ongoing. Many yeshivas are in violation of state law that mandates that all students have the right to quality education. And for the sake of these children, we need results from the department now." Speaking of now, I can tell you that we are joined right now by Naftali Moster. You may remember him from previous segments we've done on this, and he continues to be the Executive Director of Young Advocates for Fair Education, or YAFED. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also happy to introduce you to the New York Post City Hall Bureau Chief, Yoav Gonen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've written on this subject and have something of the same sort of frustration maybe that the council members expressing in not seeing results from this investigation. As we sit here now, is there any update?
There's been nothing since the hearing. And yeah, I think I've been following the Department of Education on and off for close to 10 years, actually. And there's nothing that, on the surface at least, appears too complicated about this investigation. You're trying to find out, what the curriculum is, what the syllabus is. Are they? It seems like something that you can request, right. the curriculum. What are you teaching?
It's not exactly the Moreland Commission.
Right. And also, drop in on a school and say, can we see your math books? Can we see your science books? So it seems like something that if they wanted to, they could wrap up quickly, and that's why I think Naftali's theory that they're dragging it out, is convincing.
So you founded your organization in 2012. I can imagine that one of the goals would have been to have this sort of comprehensive look at just what exactly is happening inside these classrooms. So you might have been hearkened to hear that there was an investigation, but where are you now, a few years into said investigation?
Yeah, basically, I feel like we're pretty much where we started. At least 18 months have passed since they launched the investigation, which wasn't when we first notified them about it. As you mentioned, we started YAFED in 2012. We notified the DOE, several superintendents in New York City, as well as the State Department of Education back in 2012. They didn't do anything about it until in July of 2015 when they announced the investigation. It took them 4 months since announcing the investigation to even agree to meet with us. Mm-hmm. Okay, you would assume that that would be one of the first things to do, right? But they told us that behind the scenes they were in fact investigating, maybe visiting yeshivas and things like that. And then they met with us in December of 2015 and again January of 2016, during which they promised that by the end of spring of 2016 they will produce a report. The Chancellor again reaffirmed that at a PEP meeting in April, and again at a different hearing in May of 2016, right? And here we are 9 months later, and now she's not even committing to a time frame anymore. It's just the investigation is ongoing, and we don't know when it's going to come out. And as Yoav said, it is pretty straightforward, if you ask me. She has to visit yeshivas. She has to speak to yeshiva officials, representatives, collect curricula, maybe a few report cards and things like that. She has to speak with some of the yeshiva graduates and parents of current students. Supposedly, all of that already happened by the summer of 2016. Right. I myself sat through 14 interviews with individuals, yeshiva graduates and parents of current students. So they've learned a lot during those interviews. They claim, and again, the Chancellor has said this several times, that she herself visited several yeshivas. So that's taken care of. They've told me in private that they've spoken to yeshiva officials. They've collected, they've sent out questionnaires and collected all kinds of documentation.
Like a thorough investigation has been
conducted. It seems like everything has been collected last July already. Mm-hmm. So what is happening? Why are we 9 months later and there's nothing?
So, of course, the she that we're referring to is New York City School Chancellor Carmen Farina. She testified before the New York City Council in the building you spend a lot of your time in, and she partially said that politics has not entered our minds. This is not politically motivated. I didn't take this job to do a political job. I took this job to do an educational job. So you're the City Hall Bureau Chief, and we know this isn't an elected position, but have we ever been able to separate politics from that job that Chancellor Farina is doing?
Not at all. And when I focus exclusively on education, one of the big things I lamented was how much politics is in education. It's a real shame because when politics enters education, it's never with the kids' interests at heart. It's about the adults in the room. And I mean, I guess I would say, you know, that statement that she made was actually came from reporters pressing her on the issue, not from the city council. So, and you know, with all respect to Councilmember Dromm, the questioning really, you know, wasn't sufficient to get to the bottom of what's happening. It was pretty softball, and he was the only one of any of the council members who raised the issue. Why aren't the other members of the committee concerned about this issue?
So knowing that Daniel Dromm is not exactly the representative of the conservative Jewish bastions of New York City's neighborhoods, where are the other voices of leadership on this? Do you think this is a question of oversight or political will?
Let me just say, in terms of other council members, in the weeks leading up to this hearing, we actually met with several other council members on the Education Committee, some of whom are Jewish and the Jewish caucus, and they are all supportive about what we're doing. I mean, like, really supportive. But
How
again,
vocal are they publicly about that?
Not publicly. That's the problem.
Aha.
So at least one of them said that they want to begin. See, one of the things we want to work towards is having a hearing at City Hall specifically on this issue, or at least on non-public schools, on enforcement in non-public schools. So that's one of the things we've discussed. And at least one of them said that he's thinking of a different idea of working, you know, behind the scenes. So, you know, we're sort of following those leads. But they're very supportive. And Daniel Dromm said the same thing. I think he said that during the hearing, that when he speaks to Jewish leaders, they're all very supportive and glad that he's sort of like taking this on. Mm-hmm. So that's that.
What do you think it's going to take for the mayor to actually move on this pre-election day? Because there's a lot of chatter that all the ducks are in a row. They're just waiting to make some analysis once the votes are counted.
And it seems, I mean, you could do this in a way that if they decide to release the results before the election, you can do this in a way that's not so critical of the schools, of the community. You could say we found, you know, they weren't at the level we wanted, but they've agreed to this and that reform, and you can present it as more of a cooperative solution than, you know, blaming them for not doing it and putting all these requirements in place. So it's kind of depends how they want to handle it. I don't anticipate them coming out with a scathing report before the election. They might have the option to do it afterward, but I think they're likelier to take the cooperative, softer route and perhaps even announce the results after the schools have already started making some changes.
So the last time we spoke about this, there was a voice on the other side talking about more funding, that we can fix these problems with the discrepancies in the curriculum for secular stuff if they just get more funding. And the number that we presented was $60 million worth of funding that was coming in, but they were saying it's not enough. Mm-hmm. So is this still a funding issue or a fundamental perspective issue?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of priorities. I don't know if I mentioned it back then, but if you look at the girls' Hasidic schools, right, it's segregated, the boys and the girls. The girls get a proper secular education, right, at least for the most part. They spend half the day on Jewish studies, half on secular studies. So they could do the same thing with the boys, or even just extend the secular studies by a little bit to, let's say, 2.5 hours to 3 hours, but they're choosing not to do so. So it's definitely a matter of priorities, not funding. But keep in mind, a lot of people don't know this, the public doesn't know this, but yeshivas do get hundreds of millions of dollars in funding overall. So there's Title I, Title III, E-rate, books, lunch, busing, attendance, and child care vouchers. These are all things that people don't know that non-public schools do get. And Hasidic yeshivas actually disproportionately benefit from some of these programs because they cater to low-income families. Right. So there's a lot of money over there. And again, in my opinion, it's just a matter of priorities.
So knowing what we know about these educations, it hasn't stopped people from enrolling their children into the system. I know we have a chart here where we're looking at yeshiva enrollment here in New York City. So how do you account for these numbers that tend to be trending up, especially when we look at the Hasidic community?
Right. The reason I brought this this graph was really to show, I think it's alarming when you see that the growth of the Hasidic community is so great, it's so large, and that's a good thing. That part is not alarming, but it's alarming when that means that so many more kids are being denied an education. So if you see from 1998 to 2013, the Hasidic school-age population in New York City essentially doubled. Right? And that's probably going to continue to happen. We're projecting, based on city census data and other studies, that by 2030, 30% of Brooklyn's youth will be enrolled in Hasidic yeshivas. 30% of all of Brooklyn's youth will be Hasidic. That's a huge number. So just imagine what this means when so many of them aren't getting even a basic education.
So this is something of a double-edged sword then. If we can look at a population that's growing so much that seems to be content with keeping this thing pretty insular and not wanting to bow sort of to the rules of the money or the Department of Education, they have the political will and that voting bloc to keep it that way.
And that's why you would take strong political will on the other side to do something about it. And why I think it's important that groups like his are making noise about it, that politicians only react to the loudest voice in the room. Certainly if more media picked up on the story, it does, this story gets told periodically, but there needs to be a sustained effort to get politicians to do the right thing. You never know if assuming de Blasio gets a second term, he might be more willing to do something that the community is not happy about when he doesn't have to worry about re-election.
So speaking of those loud voices, I just want to know, before you answer that, who is on your squad then? If you have some leaders who talk to you but not openly show up and support, who else is on this coalition that wants to change things? Do you have a friend in Betsy DeVos now? We got a new ed person who's very into religious education and doling out money as such.
And she also recently met with Agudat Israel, who's essentially who's taken the lead on fighting us, with the DOE. So I want to respond to that and to the previous question on one. Basically, there are a lot of Hasidic parents who are supportive of what we're doing, right? So they message us privately and contact me in any way they can, through WhatsApp and things like that, to let me know that they're supportive of it. And then when I speak to other Hasidic people, they say, you have to see, all my friends want to see some change. Or, 75% of the Hasidic community wants to see change. So the fact that Hasidic people are still enrolling their kids in the yeshivas doesn't mean that they agree with what is taking place over there. It's just that they don't have much of a choice. So in that case, it's funny, you talk about choice. It's like a school no choice in this situation. They don't have a choice. If you grow up in a Hasidic community, let's say I grew up in Belz, there was no choice for me to go to a different yeshiva. I went to Belz Yeshiva. Or if someone grows up Satmar or Vizhnitz or Skver, that's the yeshiva they go to. There's not much of a choice. It's sort of like moving to a different state and being enrolled in a different yeshiva. That's how big the difference is. So there's not much of a choice, but parents do want to see change, and everyone wants to see a different type of change. Some people want the 90 minutes be extended to, let's say, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Some people want... On a school day that lasts from 6:30 a.m. to about 8 p.m. Well, that depends. That's for high school kids. Okay. But they get no secular education at all, actually. But yeah, some people want to see it extended. Some people want to see more subjects. Some people want high school kids to get secular education. Some people want the existing 90 minutes, the quality of that to be improved. And that's been written about even in Hasidic magazines. I think in response as a result of our, raising awareness of it.
A real power hour of the secular stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So at the very least, if you're going to teach us for just 90 minutes, take it seriously, because now kids, they must be learning it from the adults that it's not important. And they cause a lot of trouble. There's no disciplinary tools, that the secular studies principals and teachers have compared to the Judaic studies. So there's actually a huge turnover rate during secular studies because the teachers can't put up with the trouble and the lack of support they get. So different people, different parents and community members want to see change in different areas, but overall there is a desire for change, right? So there's a desire on behalf of the community. I'm sure the government wants to see some improvement. Really, it's the leaders who need to be pressured to some extent to implement those changes in the community. So what we're trying to do is empower the parents and the community members to speak up and begin demanding it from their leaders. But we also want the government to come down and ask or pressure these Hasidic leaders to implement those changes.
So before we get out of here, I'm just going to ask you, we're months into this process, a year and some months. I want a prediction of what you think is going to be in the report and what corrective actions you think the city and the DOE would possibly be taking.
Well, I guess it's hard to know. Certainly, I think we can all acknowledge that the problem exists. The question is how far it extends. How many schools are we talking about? A few dozen or hundreds that aren't giving the kids the secular education they need. So I would lean toward it. I don't think it's going to be a report full of finger pointing. I think they're going to take the kind of cooperative route toward solving the issue without casting any blame. So I think it'll be kind of a softball report that starts to get things in the right direction, but it's going to take a long time to do that.
So Naftali, I'm going to ask you to name names. Who's the enemy of reform that we need to see really delve into this and have some answers and really move forward from this report?
Well, I could tell you there's a group that was formed basically to counter our efforts. They call themselves PEARLs, Parents for Educational and Religious Liberties in Schools. And they initially presented themselves as a group that's trying to improve the education system. And to me, it seems like they wanted the government to get off their back. So they said, OK, we're taking care of it. That was founded by David Niederman from UJO and David Zwiebel from Agudath Israel. And since then, they've come out in several platforms, and print media, and a hotline they have called Kalmavasar, basically bashing us, portraying us as a bunch of losers who just complain and want to destroy the community and things like that, all of which is not true, but just sort of like to rally the troops around them and to say, don't buy into anything Yafet is saying or doing, because they're just trying to destroy us. And I think that actually indicates that people within the community are warming up to us, and they are sort of like beginning to voice their concerns, and that's why they're so concerned. They're saying, no, don't. They're just trying to destroy our community and so forth. I want to say, I don't have a prediction, but I'm hoping, and of course there's a lot of back channel efforts to get the Department of Education to properly investigate and produce a report, but I'm hoping that it's going to be produced before the elections. And I agree they will probably not want to point fingers, but I'm still hoping they're going to be very specific about what they found, as opposed to trying to water down what they found or comparing it to failing public schools or to other failing schools, because there's no comparison. We're talking about kids never learning, let's say, the history of slavery in America, never learning any other history and things like that. So I hope they're going to be very clear about there's a problem, and here's what we're going to do, and by the end of 3 years, we're going to bring all these yeshivas into compliance. That is my hope.